kind of purpose do you have in your life?
That's a hard one.
I don't know, to actually like say there's a purpose for things, it's kind of difficult.
You know, we're just specks of dust on a speck of dust amongst other specks of dust.
Purpose. I think our generation seeks purpose and they want to have meaning. Can atheism provide any purpose for a person?
A person can decide irrationally. They can say, well, you know what, my purpose in life, I'm going to make my purpose in life to build the largest ball of peanut butter that has ever been accomplished, and they can just decide that. But there's no objectivity there, right? It's just something they've arbitrarily picked. By definition, if you're an accident, there's no purpose. That's what it means to be an accident. On the other hand, if we're made in the image of God, then we do have a purpose. And the fact is, because we know in our heart of hearts that God exists, we do have a sense of purpose built into us. Human beings do. That comes out even in atheists. I think of Richard Dawkins, who, you know, he's an atheist and he goes around teaching how everybody should be atheists. I think that's irrational. I mean, here's a man who is convinced that it's his purpose in life to convince people that there's no purpose in life, right? I mean, because if he was really an atheist and he thinks everything's just an accident, why would he care? But the fact that he thinks he has a purpose, and he does have a purpose, the reason that he thinks that is because he does know in his heart of hearts the biblical God. He knows that he has an objective purpose on this planet. My point is, any purpose that you invent for yourself will ultimately be arbitrary and meaningless because there's no objectivity to it. I'm going to wear cheese on my head, that's my purpose in life. Well, you can do that, but it's arbitrary, it's meaningless. It doesn't have any objective value.
My friends who are atheists, and I'm sure yours too, most of them are materialists. They
Yes.
believe in materialism. How could you explain that?
So materialism is the belief that everything that exists is made of atoms or energy. So everything that exists has a position in space. It's material. And that's a self-refuting position because anyone who would try to argue for that would have to use laws of logic in order to make the argument.
Okay.
But the problem is laws of logic are not made up of atoms. You can't point your telescope somewhere and see a law of logic or accidentally stub your toe on a law of logic. They're non-material. And so the materialist has to use something that cannot exist in his worldview in order to prove his worldview. It's an inherently irrational position. And a lot of atheists haven't thought that through, but it really is a devastating refutation of their position. I'd say it's kind of like air. You need air to breathe. Now suppose somebody comes along and says, well, that can't be the case because I don't even believe in air and I can breathe just fine, thank you very much. I'm going to say, well, I didn't say you had to profess a belief in air to breathe, but you do need air to breathe. Likewise, I'm not saying you have to profess a belief in God in order to use his laws of logic, but nonetheless, God must exist in order for laws of logic to make sense, in order for them to have the properties that they do. The way Cornelius Van Til put it, he says it's like a little girl sitting in her father's lap, insulting him, spitting on him, slapping him in the face. She can only do it because her father is supporting her. And I thought, boy, that's a powerful analogy. God, nonetheless, because of his grace, he allows people to use his laws of logic. He upholds the universe in a consistent way for them. Some people respond to that. Some people respond by slapping God in the face. It's like, I'm not going to believe in you anyway. But they can only do it because God supports them.
See the rationale? If we're just atoms acting randomly, chemicals and matter shuffle together over time, why do we care about the way the world works? The debate between these two beliefs has been raging for thousands of years. Which side have you been on? You might be thinking, I'm not on any side. I haven't decided yet. I wish to remain objective. But in this battle between belief in God and belief in nothing, is there really such thing as neutrality? Is it possible to approach this debate with no affiliation at all?
What religion are you?
Agnostic. I believe something higher power. I don't know what it is though.
For me, it's just, who knows? Something might be out there. I don't know. I'm not Christian per se, but there may be something.
Do you know what agnostic means?
Believing that there's a higher power.
Yeah. Specifically, like A, when you put A on the front of a word means not. And Gnostic, that comes from the word knowledge, not having knowledge of whether there's a God or not. So believing in a higher power doesn't necessarily make you an agnostic. An agnostic is someone who's not sure if there is a higher power. Maybe, maybe not quite an atheist.
I grew up in Southern California, and a lot of my friends that didn't go to church or who weren't Christians described themselves as
I'm agnostic. I don't believe in God necessarily, but he could exist. What is wrong with that type of thinking?
That position is self-defeating. It's a self-refuting position because people like to think, well, if I'm agnostic, I'm not taking a stand, right? I haven't decided one way or the other. But in fact, you have decided. You've decided the Bible's wrong. Because the Bible says that God is known inescapably, that God has made himself known to everyone. And so if you say, well, I'm not sure that's true, maybe God exists, but he hasn't made himself known to me. Well, you've said the Bible's wrong, in which case you've taken a stand. So it's a non-neutral position.
Why do you think so many people describe themselves as that nowadays?
I think they feel like it's a safer position because they feel like, well, that way I'm covered either way.
Okay.
But one of the things that I would point out to them, I would say, actually, if the Christian worldview is true, and I insist that it is, I know that you, as an unbeliever, don't necessarily affirm that. But if it's true, the Bible says that God is known inescapably, and so you can't not know that God exists. I know that's grammatically incorrect, but it's what's true.
Do you believe in absolute truth?
No.
Do you believe that all truth is relative, person to person?
Yeah.
Do you believe that mathematics and scientific laws are relative, person to person?
Yes.
Okay. So for me, if I want to say that 2 plus 2 is 13, that can be true for me, even though it's not true for you?
I think when you get to the fundamental level of 2 plus 2, I don't think that is person to person, but when you're getting into theories and formulas that can never be proven, then yes, I believe that you can say different things.
So do you think that some things can be proven?
Yes.
So isn't that absolute truth?
It seems like that's an absolute truth claim.
Yeah.
God does not exist, that's an absolute truth claim.
Yeah.
Yet many of them fall into relative arguments.
Yeah.
How does that happen? How do people shift from an absolute position, but then at the same time they'll fall back on relative truth positions?
And I've noticed that happens often, and
Yeah.
a lot of times they don't even realize they're doing it.
Sure,
And so I say, can you be absolutely certain about anything? Well, no, we can't have certainty. I say, are you certain about that? What, yeah. Oh, yeah, I had never thought about that. And so I'll point out, well, see, you have at least one thing you can know for certain, right? There's an inconsistency that comes when we reject the biblical God.
Let's take the scenic route for a minute. How often do you find yourself feeling confused, frustrated, even depressed, and you don't know why? Could it be that you're being told conflicting things about the world that you live in? Unsure of what is true and meaningful, or if truth and meaning even exist at all? Perhaps you've resigned yourself to trying to drown out the confusion. We've been told there is no absolute truth. We're taught to suppress what is obvious to any honest observer. Truth exists. But we're left to live in the world as if it doesn't. Say the new social media craze is not the Tide Pods, but let's say it's you go up to your mom and you poke your mom in the eyeball with a pencil. Is that wrong or is that right?
For me, it's wrong.
For you. So
Yeah.
it's fine if someone else does it though. No problems.
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay. What is 2 times 2?
4.
Okay. I think it's 5. Am I wrong?
Oh. Yeah. Yeah, you are. Because of concept and theory. But it's still a theory, so maybe you're right.
Maybe I'm right. 2
Maybe
times
I'm-
2 could be 5.
Could be, yeah.
What about 25?
Sure.
Let's just go for
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Is it wrong to beat a small child with a club?
Yeah,
Why?
because they can't defend themselves.
Okay, but what if I enjoy it? Something that just kind of de-stresses me, helps me out.
Pick on someone your own size then.
Okay, so
if
beating
it's like,
someone my own size.
yeah, so being someone your own size, that should be fine.
Then it's fine.
Yeah.
Is it any wonder so many of us are walking through life with our feet firmly planted in midair? The world is asking us to deny what we know intuitively. We know 2 plus 2 is always 4. We know it's wrong to poke your mom in the eye with a stick just as much as we know it's wrong to beat someone with a club, no matter their size. We know these things, but the world tells us that we shouldn't know anything absolutely. You're being asked to be insane, to live in 2 incompatible worlds. What could cause more confusion and mixed emotions? If you're tired of the insanity, maybe it's time to rethink your worldview.
Think of unchanging logic as the signature of an unchanging God. Because these laws of logic are orderly, they're the same for all times and all places, and they're immaterial, we can safely assume that the one who put them together is that way as well. They reflect the Creator's own nature. And the Bible says that we reflect God, that we're made in His image. This explains why humans like order and logic and rationality. Now you may be thinking, hold up, I'm not entirely sold on this idea of God as being rational. There's lots of defenses for the belief in a Christian God. One defense you maybe haven't heard so much: God is rational.
Can you prove that there is actually something out there that is like a higher power than us? Do you have any concrete evidence other than a book that was written 2,000 years ago?
When somebody says you can't prove the existence of God, I would say, actually, if you'll take a few minutes with me, I believe I can. Now, I can't persuade you. I can prove something, and that doesn't necessarily mean a person will be persuaded by it. For example, I can prove that E equals MC squared. I have that derivation in one of the books that I wrote. Now, maybe somebody says, well, I just don't believe it. Or maybe they don't even understand it.
Sure.
That doesn't mean the proof's invalid, does it?
Right.
There's a difference between proof and persuasion. I can prove the Christian worldview in the sense that showing the alternatives are irrational, and therefore Christianity is the only possibility.
I think a lot of them would say, well, atheism is the only rational worldview. It's the only rational way of thinking because Christians or theists, yeah, you guys believe in some person up in the sky, right? That's not rational. Well, how would you respond to a person who says that believing in any God or that's irrational?
If they're going to play the rational game, I'm going to win. And I don't mean that in a snarky way. It's the Christian worldview that's the only rational possibility. The people that I have most difficulty with are people who say, I don't care about rationality. I find it very difficult to help people like that. But people who are concerned about rationality, well, let's talk about what it means to be rational. To be rational is to have a good basis for those things that you believe. I would point out that laws of logic are a reflection of the way God thinks and the way He expects us to think. And so if I'm going to be logical, I need to think like God. Now, obviously my atheistic friend, he's not going to accept that, but then I'm going to point out that he doesn't have a different definition of laws of logic that makes sense with what is true to the nature of logic. So laws of logic like the law of non-contradiction, which says you can't have A and not A at the same time in the same sense. And we all accept that as true. Yeah. And we accept that as universal, meaning it applies everywhere. We accept that it doesn't change with time, right? Not like laws of logic work on Thursdays, but not on Fridays, anything. No,
right.
They're consistent over time. And so I would say I, as a Christian, can make sense of that because my position is that laws of logic reflect God's thinking. He does not change with time, therefore laws of logic won't change with time. Laws of logic, I know they apply everywhere because God is sovereign over the entire universe. He's omnipresent, his power upholds the entire creation. And so I can make sense of the fact that laws of logic exist. There's a lawgiver. I can make sense of the fact they're universal. God's omnipresent. I can make sense of the fact that laws of logic don't change with time because God is beyond time. He created time. I can make sense of the fact that laws of logic are exceptionless because God's sovereign over all truth claims. And then I would say, but how can you, Mr. Atheist, account for those properties? And even if he says, well, I just think they're that way, I'm going to say, how do you know they're that way? Apart from the Christian worldview, you couldn't know any of those things. How could you possibly know that laws of logic work everywhere in the universe? Have you been everywhere in the universe? Well, no, you haven't, of course. You couldn't possibly know that. I would say you don't have a good reason for claiming that God doesn't exist. And in fact, you have every reason to believe that He does exist. And you exhibit the fact that you know that God exists in your heart of hearts by the way you behave. Because I noticed that you try to behave in a moral fashion, and I appreciate that. You didn't try to kill me when we came in here. I'd say something like that.
Do you think morality is objective or subjective?
That's a good question. There are subjective elements of morality, but I think everyone can establish certain objective standards of morality. Some would argue that it's objective. Some would argue that killing is bad all around, but I would argue it's a little bit of both. There are certain things that are for sure, you don't kill someone for no reason. You just don't.
That only makes sense in a Christian worldview because the fact is, if we're just cosmic accidents, it doesn't make sense that I should behave in a particular way because chemistry just does what chemistry does.
Right.
There's no right or wrong about it. You mix the vinegar in the baking soda, it will fizz. Not like you get upset at it. You shouldn't have fizzed. Bad baking soda, right? It's going to do what it does because it's just chemistry. And so the fact that people have knowledge of there's what we do and there's what we should do, that indicates that they do have the knowledge of God written on their hearts, just like the Bible teaches.
Who defines what morality is?
God. Where does morality and morals come from?
From the law that God has given to us.
His commandments.
10 Commandments.
God has written His law on our hearts. And so all of us have a sense of right and wrong. And that only really makes sense in a biblical worldview where we have a God who has created us in His image and therefore has the right to make the rules. He's built into us. He's hardwired into us like a computer code. You know, computers, you can install new software on it, but they come with software too. It's built in. God has installed in us a sense of His decree for how we're to behave. And the fact that all people have that sense of morality is an indication that the Christian worldview is true and that God really is who He says He is.
So without God, logic is a tool that you can use, but you can't explain. The biblical worldview explains logic and reason, giving us hope and light to properly understand the universe we inhabit. But the Bible doesn't stop there. The greatest hope that the Bible provides. Next,